everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lucy and today I wanted to film a video about one of my favourite topics, and that is classic books. But I wanted to film a video all about the most loved classics that I haven't read yet, of which there are probably a few, and I'm sure there are quite a few of your favourites in this list that I just haven't read. I mean, I would say I'm quite a not knowledgeable classical reader, but I have read a lot of classics. I studied English at university where you read a lot of classics. Like, I took many modules that were more classical, so I did a whole module on Shakespeare, whole modules on Victorian modernist literature, which allowed me to read a lot of the kind of more staple classics and also maybe some more unusual classics. But of course I couldn't read everything, and I think like there are a lot of kind of classics that I've just missed the boat on, whether or not that's just because they weren't on my like curriculum at school or at university, but like just in general, like those much loved classics that a lot of people have just kind of voluntarily read, I have not read. So in this video, I'm going to talk through the classics that I really want to read that are beloved by so many people. So I have my cup of coffee here. Get yourself a warm drink on this quite gloomy Saturday when I'm filming this. It's currently raining and it doesn't look all that nice outside, which means it's the perfect kind of weather to talk about books. So first up is a classic that I've been meaning to read for so long. A lot of people adore this book. It's a lot of people's like favourite classic. And it is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. So Dodie Smith was a writer during World War II, and she actually wrote this book in World War II. I believe she was in America and she was kind of writing about the England that she'd left behind. So I Capture the Castle is kind of a coming of age, I believe, a kind of more like fairy tale-esque classic. I don't know a lot about it, this is the thing. So I know there's a really lovely film adaptation of it, and I think there might be a few, but a lot of people love the film or TV adaptation. A lot of people just love this for the kind of like Englishness and the kind of like innocence around it. Apparently it's quite a beautiful classic. So I'm really excited to actually read this one day. I have this book on my shelf, but for some reason, have I read it? No. I think this is like such a quintessential British classic, and also because it's not an older classic, it's written during World War II, it's more of a modern classic. So I think that may be why I've just kind of passed this by, is because a lot of the classics that I would read are kind of older, whether that is, you know, like Elizabethan era, Jacobean era, to more like Victorian stuff. So that would kind of be the time frame that I would read a classic in, but kind of a lot of modern classics have slipped me by, including I Capture the Castle. The second classic, or more specific classical like author who a lot of people love, who I've never read, is John Wyndham. So I've never read the Chrysalids. That is probably one of the books that a lot of people tell me to read the most. A lot of people really love John Wyndham. Now, this is where it kind of makes me seem a little bit ignorant, because I don't know anything about this book. I know nothing about this author, and I kind of was tempted to look up, you know, the plot details about these books that I want to talk about. But at the same time, I kind of don't want to spoil myself, like more about the details of each classic. But he is another example of a modern classic that a lot of people love, and I just haven't read. It's all the modern classics that kind of trick me out, but I'm very excited to eventually read John Wyndham, and the Chrysalids is probably one of his most famous books. The third classic I haven't read that everyone talks about, everyone loves, is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. So there have been countless TV adaptations, countless film adaptations of this. I think there was a recent, I want to say there was a recent BBC or ITV adaptation of this a few years back, and I remember it coming on TV, and I remember kind of earmarking it and saying I have to watch this. I just never did. This actually features one of the most loved literary characters in Becky Sharp, I believe is her name, but she is the protagonist of Vanity Fair, and I believe it's kind of about that society at the time. And what stands out about this novel is it sounds like something I would actually love. Like, I know from the bottom of my heart I'm probably gonna love Vanity Fair, but have I read it? No. I also have this on my shelf as well, but it's quite a thick novel, and I think maybe that's why it's been putting me off, just because I just, you know, when a classic is quite chunky, it does kind of put me off a tiny bit, even though I've read a lot of big chunky classics because I've had to for university or for school. And this is from the person who had to read all of Shakespeare's sonnets in a week for her Shakespeare module, and yet I can't read Vanity Fair because I'm like, it's too big. So we will get around to reading Vanity Fair at some point. I know it's a lot of people's favourite novels. I know all this and I will read it. Do let me know if it is one of your favourite novels and if you think it's worth me reading. It'll be really interesting to hear your thoughts in the comments about any of these novels. The next classic or classical author who is like one of the staples, like a modern classic staple, is George Orwell. Have I read any George Orwell? No, I haven't. So 1984 and of course Animal Farm. You know, George Orwell kind of created the whole Big Brother concept, and I have never read him. I think what puts me off a little bit is because I did more kind of modernism at university and I'm not a big fan of like a modern classic. George Orwell really explores the kind of like not post-apocalyptic but more dystopian elements. So he looks at kind of the politics of the state and kind of state control, corrupt governments, etc. So I feel like maybe that's the reason why I just haven't gotten to George Orwell yet, just because like I feel like I know what to expect from him. Maybe that's really kind of like not okay. Maybe I should just, you know, just read his books. But I just feel like I don't know if I'd enjoy them, basically. But I feel like 1984 is kind of one of the classics and maybe I do need to read him. Along the same vein is the next book I'm going to talk about, and that is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck and The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. So I have never read any John Steinbeck. I think it's because a lot of people did him in the school curriculum. So I think he, Of Mice and Men was in the like, maybe like year 9 in the UK, like you did Of Mice and Men on the curriculum. But for some reason, my teachers chose to do something different. I can't remember what book I did instead. I think it was Lord of the Flies. But for some reason, I didn't do Of Mice and Men, so I missed out on reading John Steinbeck. And I kind of am a bit sad about that because everybody, you know, it's kind of like such a staple classic that everyone loves and everyone like has read, but I've just never read John Steinbeck. Which is funny because when I went to Monterey in California a few years back, I was kind of like, I fell in love with the whole like Cannery Row scene, like, and obviously John Steinbeck was really inspired by that area and he actually wrote a book called Cannery Row. So I kind of have like knowledge of John Steinbeck, but I've just never read any of his books. So maybe this is the perfect time. Maybe this is the moment where I actually just read John Steinbeck. And the next book I'm ashamed to admit because I feel like I know this book already so well. It is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. And the reason I know this book so well, because in Cassandra Clare's The Infernal Devices series, this book plays a huge part in the narrative and is such a kind of like staple to those books. So I kind of feel like I'm already in love with this book and yet I've never read it. I've got it on my shelf, I've got physical copies of this book, like more than one copy of A Tale of Two Cities, but I have not read it. So if you're unaware of what this book is, I believe it's set during the French Revolution. It is about, the kind of French Revolution based in Paris. And Charles Dickens is obviously one of the greatest Victorian writers out there, and I haven't read it. And I'm ashamed to because I feel like I would love this. Charles Dickens, as I have talked about on my channel before, sometimes a little bit harder to kind of grasp because his novels are quite dark and quite dense, I believe. That's my personal opinion. But Great Expectations is one of my favourite classics, so if I loved Great Expectations, maybe I will also love A Tale of Two Cities. Finally, guys, the final big classic that everybody loves that I haven't read yet is Middlemarch by George Eliot. This is one of the books that a lot of people say you have to read. It's been hailed as the greatest Victorian novel of all time, like quite a big accolade there on all the kind of lists that I was researching this video from. So I was kind of like looking at a lot of classics you must read before you die, or much like the best loved classics. In a lot of these lists, Middlemarch is on top. It's been hailed as the greatest Victorian novel. It's also a long novel. It's like a beast. I have read George Eliot before. I think she wrote Adam Bede, which I read in university. I didn't get along with that novel at all. I found it quite boring. I'm sorry, George Eliot. I just couldn't get to grips with George Eliot's writing, but I really do want to read Middlemarch. And actually my friend Claire over at Claire Fenby, her YouTube channel, she's actually hosting a Middlemarch read along in July, I believe, which I do kind of want to do. And maybe that will kind of give me the push to read Middlemarch, because, you know, if it's been hailed as the greatest Victorian novel ever, like, that's a pretty good reason to read the novel, I would say. Let me know if you have ever read Middlemarch, what your thoughts are. I'm sure there are a lot of brilliant classical readers out there, you guys who are watching these videos, who can give me tips on these books that I mentioned, and just reassure me that they're not that scary and that I should just read them and take the plunge. So guys, that is it for this video. I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope I talked about some of your favourite classics in here. If not, let me know. Are there any classics you think I may not have read, or let me know what your favourite classic is so I can see if I've read that. Either way, this year, I kind of really want to get around to reading more classics. As I talked about at the beginning of the video, I used to read a lot. I used to read a classic a week at least for my university course. And now I just don't, and it's really sad, especially because I just love reading brilliant works of literature. And that's why I kind of created this channel. So there you go, it's come full circle. If you did enjoy this video, guys, please do hit that subscribe button for weekly bookish videos, and I will see you in my next video very, very soon. Bye.